chewing up free speech, literally chewing up free speech at the University of Texas, Austin, next on Campus Roundup. Hi, I'm Dr. Duke, and this is the Campus Roundup at the College Fix. Our top story today, our segment, focuses on the abuse of free speech at the University of Texas, how conservative activists are being shouted down, and the victims of actual violence and assault. To talk more about this, we welcome Saurabh Sharma. Saurabh, you are the chairman of the Young Conservatives at the University of Texas, Austin, correct?
That is correct.
Tell us a little bit about the incident that happened around the Judge Kavanaugh confirmation.
Sure. So my group last week saw that the farcical status of the confirmation process at the national level kind of morally impelled us to act. I didn't see a lot of protests going along nationwide in support of Judge Kavanaugh, so we decided to get out there, and we made some simple signs: confirm Kavanaugh, Kavanaugh for justice, some slightly more controversial ones such as #MeToo, gone #TooFar, and we just set up on the West Mall of our campus, which is an area where these type of tabling events historically happen, and expected to have some constructive dialogue with our peers. We started about 11 a.m., and within 35 minutes, a very large crowd started to form that began kind of shouting expletives at us and stuff. At one point, a violent protester came up and started tearing up our signs. She even took a bite out of one of them, which is one of the most hilarious videos you'll ever see. And it just kind of escalated from there. And at some point, the crowd grew larger and larger, and we had planned to go till 1 o'clock. We ended up doing so, and we left the scene promptly after. But at its apex, the crowd was probably, in the triple digits, very loud, very uninterested in dialogue, just interested in shouting and tearing up our property and such.
And as you said, they physically accosted you. They didn't just mangle your signs. They bumped into people. They put their hands on you. Somebody got a sign knocked into their eye, correct? And as all this was going on, how soon did it take before campus authorities to get to you guys?
So the campus authorities were there from the beginning, but they took this sort of halfway sort of stance during the whole thing, where they were attempting to bring some sort of order to the event, but they weren't willing to use the University of Texas Police Department in order to do so. So when that violent protester came up, sort of accosted our members, tore the signs, and in snatching them kind of knocked someone in the eye, as well as put her hands on me in order to take my sign. Luckily enough, my sign is actually the only one that remained from the whole process. They didn't ask the University of Texas Police Department to remove that girl from the scene. In fact, she was back very soon after. And so, but they did attempt in some ways to create a space through which the discussions could happen, but it wasn't nearly enough.
So the important point here is that the University of Texas authorities allowed your personal property and your right to speech be assailed, and they stood back and did nothing. Before we went on the air here, you and I had a conversation briefly, and I think you said something that was really, really important. Talk about the history of the University of Texas and what you called, I think really quite articulately, halfway measures. Talk about how the University of Texas plays this, the idea of free speech on a college campus, and the ways they sort of get around having to enforce real free speech.
Sure. So the University of Texas is in Texas, and so they are always wary of our state legislatures, which my club has a very good relationship with, because they understand that if the conservative state legislatures see the state's flagship university descending into a far-left toxic swamp, that they will take action. And so they're very good at creating this sort of facade of, oh no, we are protecting free speech. And so the more crony members of the Texas legislature have sort of the moral protection from taking any real action, because they can say, oh no, the university was trying to protect free speech. And so they are not like a university like DePaul or University of California, Berkeley, where they actively try and suppress conservative speech, but they are very adept at trying to split the baby and make it so that they don't actually take any real action against the dangerous leftist groups on campus, while at the same time looking like they're interested in free speech.
Yeah, I think this is a really critically important point to make. We saw it last week when we talked with Mark Pulliam, who has founded a website to sort of monitor the University of Texas, that the universities, despite all of their knee-jerk reactions to free speech, they're going to give liberals and progressives all the free speech in the world, but they're a little bit janky when it comes to really defending the right of conservative kids, and this false equivalence they make, right? That we're going to protect you. You had the right to speak, even though you were assaulted. You got, as you were being assaulted, you still were allowed to speak. And these legislators and some of the legislators and the faculty at UT want to claim a false moral equivalence. Talk a little bit more about that false moral equivalence as it works its way on campus.
Sure. So after the protest, the vice president of diversity and community engagement, which is the sort of diversity bureaucracy at UT, it stands at 94 staff strong, which is unprecedented as far as I know nationwide. We're a large university, but you don't need 94 diversity bureaucrats. They released a statement where they sort of, again, did this sort of half measure, kind of superficially extolling the virtues of free speech and dialogue while at the same time doing this very odd thing. And it's sort of difficult to tell when you first read it, but a couple of reads will show you what the truth of the matter is. They were making a moral equivalence between us, peaceful protesters, who were simply interested in having dialogue on campus and didn't lay a hand on anyone and were peaceful, didn't yell any expletives, didn't do anything even remotely aggressive, and the violent protesters who tore up our property, were hurling violent expletives at us the whole time, doxed us after the fact. They make a moral equivalence and say, oh, both sides got to air their grievances, and so free speech was protected and the university is what it's supposed to be. And that was truly shocking and just morally reprehensible on their part.
Is it fair to say, this is almost a rhetorical question, that of those 94 diversity officers at the University of Texas, I would bet not one of them is trained in guaranteeing the rights of minority conservative students to speak?
And that's almost guaranteed at this point. You know, they seem much more interested in very obscure sort of far left campus advocacy than they do in protecting the rights of conservatives. And that's only the surface. We've only started to recently figure out that there is other ways that this sort of leftist advocacy is funded through the taxpayer dollar here in Texas. We've just started some investigations into our student government that funds groups that are actually very closely related with the communist group that went and doxed our members. Specifically groups like the Queer and Trans People of Color Association. They receive money from student government, which itself gets $110,000 to dole out to campus groups in order to do their activism. And they're very closely related with the Autonomous Student Network, which is the communist group on campus. So the 94 diversity bureaucrats is only the tip of the surface. There's much more money and time and energy that goes into this sort of far-left advocacy on campus, not to mention the advocacy disciplines that exist in themselves.
Last thing I wanted to ask you, and you guys have done fantastic work, and I want to thank you for being with us today. What do you think is likely to happen? Jen Cavani just wrote a wonderful article at TheCollegeFix about how the students who attacked you, quote unquote, might face discipline. We both know that if you were a conservative group that was violently attacking a homosexual group or a socialist group or something like that, this would not be an equivocation. We would have seen huge condemnations from all levels of administration and staff. There would have been swift vengeance and retribution. But with you guys, maybe. Where do things stand right now with the University of Texas administration about your case?
Sure. So it first came to our attention that the university is possibly taking some sort of action when the individual who actually, gobbled up our sign took off her Twitter account, and a couple of people started commenting on various tweets that we were making with a letter that she had gotten from the university saying she had to attend a disciplinary hearing. And so the leftists on campus actually got extremely angry about this and said that they were going to retaliate and begin filing reports against Young Conservatives of Texas. Now, we haven't received any disciplinary notifications yet. I don't believe that we will. That doesn't seem like the university's strategy in attempting to appease both sides historically, but you never know.
Saurabh, you have a winning strategy, and I want to congratulate you. You are doing research. You are making sure that you're investigating the people investigating you. You are in touch with alumni and politicians outside of the university. You are doing it right. Keep up. Keep doing that. And we at The College Fix, we will make sure we get your story out there. Stay in touch with us. Saurabh Sharma, we are certainly glad to meet you and glad to talk to you today. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Duke.
All right, now pivoting to our Talking Campus segment, our weekly discussion with members of the College Fix editorial team. Today I'm joined by College Fix assistant editor Dave Huber to continue the conversation about disparate free speech rights on college campuses. Dave, thanks for joining me today.
Duke, great to see you as always.
Well, what we know, and what we know from the story at the University of Texas, is that whenever privileged or ideological or minority groups find trouble at universities, the universities are unequivocal in immediately reacting. When conservative kids are the ones being doxxed or bullied or attacked, it gets a little more squishy. Talk about the premise.
the way I look at it is that they realize that their views aren't, in outside of the academy, they're actually not that popular. And that frustration basically boils over. So they have to, shut down the opposite view. They have to, pretty much get it off the platter, so to speak. So it's not even considered, because in the end, they're not going to look very good when you look at both sides and evaluate the premises of both.
But here's the thing. For 40, 50 years, we've been hearing from progressives that stereotypes, generalizations, characterizations of people that are one-dimensional, these are verboten. These are absolutely signs of racism, discrimination, and sexism. And yet how many different stereotypes, generalizations, how many hairs are being split, how many names are being thrown at people who simply hold traditional values? And why is it impossible for the people who run universities, these 94 diversity officers hired by the University of Texas, why are they unable to see that all of that stereotyping, it's a two-way street?
Well, it's true. I'd really like to know when this basically a complete 180, like you mentioned, on how progressives have looked at race. Martin Luther King Jr.'s whole premise, looking beyond skin color and the content of our character. This comes up. This whole conflict comes up frequently for those like yourself and me and others who were basically brought up believing that, and rightfully so, in that whole philosophy. And now we're like asked to, well, no, you have to consider skin color. And you're like, well, why? And well, it's because if you don't, you're overlooking all the hardships and the oppression that historically disadvantaged groups have had. But then again, if turns the whole concept of equality among Americans, equality of equal rights, equal opportunity, it turns it on its head. Again, it puts it on that power dynamic scale where certain people have a little bit more rights in this regard, at least they should have, and then those that have been historically advantaged have to have a little bit less to make things better. The problem is that they'll never equal out if it's up to progressives. The payback factor for historical wrongs will always be a factor.
Well, you hit on something really important. If Martin Luther King were alive today and were a university professor, and he said to his class that I have a dream that one day people will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character, he would be the victim of an immediate bias response team investigation, because you can't do that anymore, right? Even Martin Luther King. Last thing I wanted to ask you about is you wrote a nice article for TheCollegeFix, 11 different instances, and you could have picked probably 100, where conservative speakers, conservative thinkers have been dramatically shut down on college campuses. Just give me a quick overview of the article.
Yeah, it was basically like a compilation of some of the instances from the last school year, some of the more outrageous examples where so-called, controversial, some more than others, speakers were shouted down. The most outrageous, in my view, was probably the one instance at the University of Connecticut, where there was a student, or speaker, excuse me, it was a speaker, conservative speaker who had was affiliated with like these flyers that were going up that it's okay to be white. Now, of course, these days, flyers such that have a statement like that on them are going to be wildly controversial, as mild as it may seem to others. But remarkably, the speaker was escorted out and was initially charged with breaching the peace. The speaker, even though he was the one being shouted down and protested, the charges were eventually dropped. But it just goes to show you, I mean, this is the point we're getting, where, somebody at a college campus, the person who's being charged with an actual crime. He's the one who's supposed to be speaking on something that is seemingly to anybody else a statement, it's okay to be white. That is a breach of the peace, and how dare he speak up in support of that instance. It boggles the mind, dude.
As the world turns on college campuses, it really has become a soap opera. I urge all of you out there in viewership land, go to TheCollegeFix, read Dave's article. It is stunning. What wonderful piece of journalism, just an overview of what's been going on your college campuses with regards to free speech. Dave Huber, it's a pleasure to speak with you today. Thanks again for your time. If we boil down American justice to one phrase, it would have to be equal justice under the law. You could take all the rest of the Constitution, all the amendments, you could take the Bill of Rights, and you can boil them down to that statement, equal justice under the law. On college campuses and universities, however, as we have just seen, that's not the case. There is swift retribution when progressive kids feel threatened. There is almost no justice when conservative kids are attacked. That's unequal justice under the law. Thankfully, at the University of Texas, Austin, we have people like Sarab, people who are tying in their organizations with alumni, with state legislators. The way to fix this problem is to have a network that extends beyond the university. I've said it many times. Universities will not reform themselves. There is no reason for them to do so. The people who do the hiring are already the people who are the problem. If you're going to fix this, we need to get kids on campus in touch with lawmakers and activists and alumni who have the right worldview, a worldview for equal justice to all. That's the dream, equality. And you can't have equality if you're privileging one side over another, and that seems to be the fundamental flaw of the modern progressive university. And that's The Final Fix. Be sure to stay up on all the latest news and information from The Fix by joining us on all of our social media platforms. For the Campus Roundup, I'm Dr. Duke, and we will see you next time.